All right, welcome to Dev Better. My name is Jeremy. I am the host of the show. And as you guys know, we like to talk about problems that we've seen as a software engineering consultancy over certain clients and all the things that we do on the day to day. Today is going to be an amazing chat. Number one, because it's about a specific uh, controversial topic that I love to talk about, and that is Agile Anti Patterns. I also have an amazing guest with me, Colleen Johnson. Go ahead and introduce yourself because I'm not going to do it justice.
Thanks, Jeremy. My name's Colleen Johnson. I am in Denver, Colorado. I've worked in the software industry for a little over 20 years and about half of that time in the Agile space.
Mm.
I'm kind of Agile by accident, which I think everybody really is. I don't know that anybody seeks out anymore to maybe now, but definitely not when I started.
Right.
Yeah, I have a journalism degree, let's be honest. But I was in QA, and I think a lot of people in the Agile space are in QA because shit rolls downhill, and we're all really invested in trying to not be on the receiving end of that.
Exactly.
I think a lot of folks in QA are really invested in trying to fix the patterns that are broken in software development. And so I had an opportunity to start learning Agile and coaching QA teams on what it meant for them to be part of an Agile team, which was tricky, right? And honestly, a little threatening for a lot of people in the quality space, especially.
Yep.
I was a QA manager for a while, and it was like, what happens to my job if my team is now part of a different team? And then I learned a lot about Scrum, as most people do from the beginning, and became a Scrum Master, and got to work in some really early startups as a Scrum Master. And then I became the CEO of ProKanban.org. So I'm working alongside Dan Vacanti and Pratik Singh on trying to spread the good word and build a strong community about how Kanban works, and not just in software, but how it can work in other industries as well. So we've been working on Kanban for our taglines, Kanban for everyone, but how can Kanban fit for sales, marketing, HR, all these different industries? Because it's really all just about flow and value, right?
Absolutely.
Um,
Pro tip,
yeah,
it does work everywhere.
it does work everywhere. Yeah.
I'm going to try really hard, but I don't really care if we end up becoming a Kanban commercial for this episode. I'm fine with that because I like to call Kanban grown up Scrum, but we can get into that later, just as you mentioned. So awesome. Super, super happy to have you, Colleen. Colleen and I worked together at a previous life, and I was so incredibly impressed with her aptitude with process, and she actually is the reason that I like Kanban. So you have a lot to thank you for. So let's describe the problem in typical Dev Better fashion. We're going to just chat through general monologuing. Appreciate you hanging on there while I kind of humor me. I'll get there, and then we have four anti-patterns that I would like for us to discuss together and talk through how it's impacted our teams and some ways that we can actually avoid those anti-patterns when we're working with our crews on the ground. So here we go. Agile SDLCs are perceived to have saved the day with respect to how software is engineered. Unfortunately, they haven't. The Agile Manifesto is a central document that's designed to underscore some of the crucial principles for our teams to follow, but it does not prescribe a specific methodology, process, or set of rules, right? It's clearly indicated in the line, people in interactions over process and tools. Unfortunately, we've obsessed a bit over process frameworks like Scrum and completely ignored that line in the manifesto because executives need deadlines and managers think that they need high fidelity predictability, right? Deadlines and completion dates, let me be very clear, they're a fact of building everything. I'm not here to tell you that you should never ever estimate any, well, actually, I'm going to say that, but you should definitely walk towards deadlines because it makes sense there. So there's no shame in wanting those things. But where frustration abounds is when trusting the glorious system that you've painstakingly spent an incredible amount of time insulating from entropy falls apart due to one black swan, right? Process laden Agile SDLCs are fragile. They do not get better when chaos abounds. So should we just hang up the towel and quit, right? And should we allow developer anarchy to rule the streets while the inmates run the asylum? No, right? Instead, we're going to focus on building anti-fragile software development life cycles that can handle entropy and non-determinism, which is inherent in any software engineering process. We should seek metrics yes, I said it, that improve with chaos. That's the part people don't get. And allow teams the freedom to innovate and execute without fear of those metrics being weaponized, which is another huge thing that pisses me off. We manage morale, and we use metrics as directional measures that allow us to solve for root causes in our system, and also have the courage to realize that sometimes the answer is we have to move the deadline. Which is the fun thing that nobody wants to hear on the business side. So assuming a group of well-intentioned and talented software engineers, which is a requirement, right? We can talk about that too. Along with a scrappy product team, you can actually achieve a predictable, well-balanced, agile software development lifecycle. So that's my monologue. Colleen, let's talk about anti-patterns. Yeah. Set the stage. The first anti-pattern, and it kind of called it out in my little chat there, is the belief that Agile SDLCs have solved for variance and non-determinism in developing software. That's obviously wrong, right? Why do Agile systems have a propensity to skew towards being more fragile, and how do we insulate them and avoid the mistake of placing our full trust in metrics that will ultimately break our hearts? What do you think about this?
Well, so I think you touched on so many things right there, right? This concept of that we know everything that we need to work on. We know the scope of all of it before we start, that story pointing is going to guide us to how long things are going to take is crazy. Like I'm working currently on the team at Agile Velocity, and the founder there calls it, he says we do all of our planning at the dumbest point in a project. And I love that concept because It really is like, we don't know what we're going to build. We might have an idea of how we're going to build it, but a good dev team is going to get in there and they're going to uncover all this new stuff, and technology is going to change, and your team may change, right? Things are going to change. Right. Trying to plan how everything's going to work at the very beginning is crazy, and it's a waste of time, to be honest. So I think the better we can be about going into any effort of what we're going to build, whether it's technology, whether it's a house, right, or a garden, whatever your thing is that you're going to build, you have to expect the unexpected and go into it with a process that's going to allow you to inspect and adapt what you're working on. And it's funny, we say all of that as part of Agile, but just like you said, we spend all this time, especially in some of the more rigid frameworks of upfront planning everything, right? I walk into organizations sometimes that are like, hey, look, we've got 6 months worth of stories in our backlog. Aren't we doing great? And I'm like, no. None of that's probably even valid anymore. You probably don't not going to do half of it far ahead, right? Exactly. Where I see teams where they're like, we have this big initiative coming up, and here's our calendar broken out into 2-week sprints with a list of user stories in every 2-week block. And I'm like, that's probably wrong before you can print it.
Right.
That's not what we were ever supposed to be doing. And so I think the first big anti-pattern I would call out is planning, right? And and it's not that you can't plan. I think you need a direction, but I think that the way that we're going about planning is giving us like false hope, right? And it's burning people out. It takes a lot of time, and we get into this pattern of making our dev teams feel like they're not doing the right work, right? Or that they're not delivering enough because they're not marching to a plan that was never going to work out in the first place.
And I want to hit on that as a software engineer that's been the recipient of mandated story points. I think that is one of the biggest things that frustrates me about the over planning event is we spend, as you said so eloquently, we spend all of this time coming up with a list of stories and breaking them out into chunks, and we're so proud and happy of ourselves. Guess what you just did? You played the waterfall game. You turned an entire Scrum exercise that's supposed to be dynamic into a static exercise, right? An SDLC has to be dynamic because developing software is a dynamic act, right? We're painting a picture. We're not building a house, right? So to tell me that I have everything planned out for you in the next 6 months and it's never going to change, or you play the game where you build in the variance just a little bit, right? You say, okay, well, plus or minus 15%. Okay, great, that's fantastic. That's probably going to win your numbers game, but it's not going to win your engineers. Your engineers are down there, the smart ones, going, what in the hell am I actually doing? This is a waste of my time. Because developers are creative people. We want to build good things. We want to develop software that meets business needs. And when you block everything out through this over-planning exercise and you force us to walk through your Rube Goldberg machine of sprints, then all of a sudden we're here going, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
This is terrible. I'm leaving.
Yeah.
I have nothing. Nothing is here for me other than a paycheck.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then that autonomy, the opportunity to be creative about how you're solving problems, we're taking all of that away from brilliant people that we hire to do creative work in the process. And I think that's the
Right.
other thing I hear a lot from developers is by the time they get down to tell me how many points this story is, they feel like we're kind of micromanaging the work in a way where they don't understand how it fits together anymore. There's no big picture. There's no opportunity to say, what problem are we trying to solve? And no one wants to be a part of that, right? I think that's why people leave big companies a lot and go back to working at startups, is because you get to be close to the problem you're solving and part of that conversation about the work instead of just on the receiving end of individual tasks to go complete.
Right. And I like to point at David Marquette's intent-based leadership for this
Yep.
because he discusses, if you've never heard of this guy, go check him out, YouTube, his videos. Fantastic dude. He was in the Navy for a long time. And one of the videos I saw is called Greatness. And I really gravitated to that because being a software engineer, I want the capability to make a decision. And what we do in strict agile process laden SDLCs is we strip all of the decision making from the process and we just say, just go do what you're told. That doesn't resonate with me, right? As someone who spent 6 years going to school figuring out how to solve problems, now you're taking all of the fun away from me. Of course, I'm going to quit my job and leave and go work for a startup where I am closest to how the work needs to get done and I get to make autonomous decisions. Now, there are some anti-patterns in that as well that are different things we can talk about in a different episode to avoid, again, the inmates running the asylum. You have to have some process, right? You can't just do whatever you want. But I would claim that Kanban also fixes a lot of this because Kanban, through the top-down approach and going through and prioritizing X, and X is like a limited amount, I think you help to solve that problem a little bit because you allow for the variance below your top 10 that you prioritized to just phase in and out as necessary. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's a lot that I think resonates with about Kanban to me. You called it adult scrum, right? And it's funny you said that. I was just working with a team that's not even doing development, and we had the same conversation, right? We basically said, Kanban to me is all about putting the right information in front of an adult group of people so that they can make the right decisions about how to use their time.
Absolutely.
And you don't need a scrum master telling you how to do that. You don't need a product owner telling you how to do that. If we organize the data in the right way and display it in the right way, then when I have capacity, I should be able to go figure out what to work on next. And I think that's empowering, right? But it's also, we hear regardless of what framework or what approach you're using to deliver software, I think one of the other things we hear a lot is dates get set and we have no ability to hit that, right? We have no opportunity to even take control of the work that we're doing to be successful with this date we've been given. And I think that's the other thing that Kanban really shines at is if you use the data about how you're delivering to look at work item age, cycle time, throughput, how much work you have in progress. These are simple metrics.
Yep.
And it's like simple things that you can all of a sudden start to see to be like, oh shit, that story's been in development for 3 weeks. Like, let's go do something about that. Is it stuck? Is it blocked? Do you need help? Are your kids sick and you just need some, backup? I don't know, but it's like a little bit of data goes a long way, I think, in empowering everybody to make smarter decisions about what they're working on. And it takes that level of overhead off the table.
Love it. And that flows directly into my next anti-pattern, right? A focus on we've seen these days in our industry, a focus on productivity metrics. You heard about the Chase thing where they install a bunch of stuff on people's software or people's machines. And there was several frameworks. I've spoken to your husband about this, and we're going to do a Dev Better with him. We're going to talk about these development productivity metrics because they really kind of grind my gears. A focus on productivity metrics instead of business value, I would say, is the second anti-pattern I see in a lot of Agile SDLCs, because we just get so inundated on the story points, or we get so locked in on the hours in the very worst case, right? I think story points is a fun discussion because almost in every situation I've ever been in my entire career, story points are reduced to hours, period. They just take the total number of and it's an easy mathematical calculation. Take the total number of story points and divide it by 40 or divide it by 80, and you've got exactly how many hours a particular story point. It's so wrong because it's not even what story points were supposed to do. And I think the majority of people know that, but still, we do these things in an attempt to try and put metrics in front of our teams, and we don't even know why we're doing that. So
Yeah.
how can we measure progress, do you think, in a healthy way without destroying our team's morale?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the first thing is give them autonomy to pick, right? Some of these metrics about what they're measuring, because every team's going to give you're going to learn a lot by letting the team tell you what they want to be measured on.
Mm.
So I think that's one of the things I like to do is say, for the next quarter, for the next however long we're benchmarking these metrics, what's important to you as a team to measure, because you're going to learn a lot about what they value in that process. But I think the other piece is you probably have a lot of data already that's going to help you tell a story about how you've been working, how long things have been taking. And, as much as I would love to go in and tell everybody to bag story points, that's usually not an option that I have. There's some reason from the top down that they're being told they have to track things in story points. And so my approach is typically to try to bring up cycle time, throughput, and work item age alongside those metrics.
Love them.
And as soon as we can start to look at that, we have a lot of real-time data about what's actually happening. And, it's funny, I've seen some great scatter plot charts of cycle time where they've overlaid the story point value, and there's no correlation at all.
No correlation.
Zero correlation. And I think there's a few reasons for that. When we ask a bunch of developers to story point something, especially if we're trying to equate it to hours or normal, the other thing I see is we're going to normalize all the points across the organization too. So a 3 equals a 3 for everybody, which then is basically saying in hours. But so once we do that, when we ask a team that, if I were to ask you how long is it going to take to paint your bathroom, you might tell me 2 days. But then when you get in there and you have to tape everything and take the shower curtain down and take the cabinet off the wall, it ends up taking a week, right? And it's because there's all these activities in between, hands-on keyboard writing code that's not accounted for when we try to estimate up front. So even our best estimate is going to be wrong because there's all these other activities that take place to ship code out the door.
Right.
When we use cycle time data, we have that baked in. So we have the time it sits waiting to get merged or deployed or tested. All of that time is in that cycle time data. So we have a complete picture of how long things are actually taking. So cycle time data for me is kind of the keys to the kingdom. I would say the hard part about cycle time is it's after work is done. So it's helpful in evaluating or estimating or forecasting work, right? If I'm trying to figure out how long something's going to take, cycle time and throughput data can help me with that. It's not going to help me manage work that's currently in progress. And that's where looking at your WIP, how much work in progress do you have, and looking at the work item age. So how old is all the stuff that's in progress? Those two things are things that you can do something with, right? It's leading indicators. So you can take action on that data. And so I think those are super easy things to put in front of a team and give them some autonomy to make decisions with it.
And the funny thing is, Colleen, is everybody obsesses over Scrum and story points, and they talk about how low fidelity it is. And I'm going, hey, can you look over there at Kanban? There's like so many metrics that make sense,
right?
And levers that you can turn and knobs that you can dial. And it's funny to me that people don't want to add complexity to a system that is inherently complex. Like
it's true.
You're saying that one metric, one number across X teams in your organization is an accurate leading indicator and lagging indicator of how your teams are doing. I feel like we're overfitting that metric, right?
Oh, for sure.
You need to spend time understanding, like you mentioned, work age, cycle time. I love cycle time. It's probably my favorite Kanban metric. Yes, it doesn't tell you about how the team is operating now, but it gives you predictability down the line if you apply some fancy math to it, right? You know you're not 100%. You'll never get 100% because of the black swans of the world, but you're still able to guide a team and to guide a product crew towards picking a deadline that's reasonable and assigning ranges instead of one date. Give me a range of dates that you think are going to push this out.
Yep.
So I love it. And follow on toxic trait, I think that really irritates me about this is that we force our teams to be honor bound to completing a particular workload, right? And this goes into my just general assertion that story points are garbage. And I may get in trouble for saying this, but I think they are valuable for specific things. Like I said, I believe we're overfitting the metric, right? And that inherently means they're garbage already. But having been the recipient of story points for literally years now, like I became a developer when story points didn't exist. And then I became a developer and I worked for a big consulting firm at this giant big box retail whose logo is orange. And all of a sudden, They sell hammers too. And all of a sudden, like, there was this giant flash of Agile is the way and the life and the truth. And Agile was written by software engineers. If you go read like the author list of who built these things, it's Kent Beck, it's Uncle Bob, it's developers who see that waterfall doesn't work and software engineering is inherently an iterative process and it's not empirical. You can't measure it simply. That's why they didn't create the Scrum Manifesto. They created the Agile Manifesto with some general traits for us to follow, and then along comes Scrum, and then, you know, the Agile transformation boom of the 2000s, and now here we are, right?
Right.
What do you think of story points? I'm curious. I would love your opinion.
Well, I mean, there's a couple things that are kind of funny about the concept of story points. It's not in, you know, if you are very by the book with Scrum, it's not in the Scrum Guide anywhere that you should be using story points.
It's funny, right?
That, first of all, is, I think, you know, a misconception. But you know, I think where story points and the original intent behind story pointing, and there's various debate, I think, on who came up with the practice, but it was supposed to be about a conversation. So if I'm plucking a bunch of team members, especially early in team formation, if I'm building a team together and they, you know, I've been working in the code a long time and you haven't, this was a way for us to have a conversation about things I know that you don't know. Right. Can I do that without planning poker cards and without trying to equate that number to hours, or, you know, all of the stuff that we do now? Absolutely. Yes. And I think it's just about facilitation and communication, right? Of reviewing the work. That doesn't go away. And there's still value in talking about what is this thing and how are we going to break it down and attack it as a team. I don't think you need story points to do that, but you do need to talk about your work. And so what I see happen a lot, especially for teams that are super excited to jump to Kanban and they think that there's no meetings, they throw story pointing out the door. And then what happens is all the work that they pull in gets stuck in progress because we haven't had a conversation about what it is, how we're going to approach it, how, you know, what's our solution to build this. And so the work stops there because all of a sudden we have to figure that part out now that it's in progress. And so I think there's still a lot of value in the original intent. I just think the pointing piece, like you said, is overused.
I agree. And I think you mentioned a few things that I think are crucial. You can't just pivot. Like, Kanban doesn't solve the problems in Scrum if you don't understand how software is built, right? If you don't get that software engineering is a social activity that requires conversations and handoffs between real human beings with real problem-solving brains and real chances of misconceptions. It's an actual social network, and you have to solve all of the problems in a software engineering crew that you have to solve in any efficient organization. Right. Then you will produce an efficient organization when you recognize that. It doesn't matter what SDLC you use. Like, there are clients that we work with that use Scrum, albeit they wield it again like a blunt object. They use it effectively, and they get things out the door. And they make their management happy by providing metrics that make them feel warm and fuzzy inside. And it's even worse if they're using SAFe. Sorry if you're watching this and you like SAFe. I think SAFe is terrible. But at the end of the day, the important thing is knowing that the actual, I bet if you cracked open that Scrum SDLC, you'll find people are talking to one another. You'll find that people are sitting in rooms or on Zoom calls or in Slack chats and actually discussing things and clarifying misconceptions and clarifying requirements misses and working together as an actual team to move that piece, that whip, through their pipeline and get it out into production. It's not the process that's making you successful. It's the people on the ground that are making you successful.
100%. That's absolutely true. And I think that extends beyond just the work, right? Yeah. You know, if our goal in all of this is delivering value to our customers or to our end users, all of what you just said extends past that, right? Success isn't, did we get this many story points done in 2 weeks? Success isn't even, did we hit our cycle time target or our throughput number? It's, are we getting things to the customers when they want it? And if that's how we define value, that also hinges on the critical part of being able to pivot when you need to. And I think so many of these processes are so rigid, right? Especially when we talk about SAFe and trying to plan a quarter of sprints in advance. Like, when we start thinking about some of those efforts that we're putting into place, we're locking ourselves into not just how we deliver, but what we deliver. Right. And then I feel like it's even worse. You're compounding the problems by making it so difficult for a team to change directions, which was the whole point of Agile in the beginning, right? To be able to change quickly. And I think that's not just about how we work; it's about what we what we deliver.
Agreed. And those executives are just fearful, and maybe it's, wherever in the chain it occurs. And if I'm speaking to you and I offend you, I apologize. But you need to stop obsessing over predictability, because software is not predictable. The development life cycle, the very nature of building software, you can predict to a certain fidelity, but eventually it gets out of control, especially when you're thinking again about features. Like maybe we decide, and developers, I'm going to hit on you for a minute. We kind of get annoyed when people change direction, and we're kind of curmudgeon-y about that, where it's like, oh my God, you pulled that out of the sprint. I was working on it. I'm so annoyed. Product has and deserves the ability to shift your focus at a moment's notice. Now, what product shouldn't be doing is abusing that and giving you whiplash. Right? If you're getting whiplash from that process, then yes, your product team needs to maybe chill out a bit and select whip that makes sense, that is something you can ship to production, that will then be a value add to your clients. But we should also, as developers, be okay with changing priorities, and we should embrace the fact that it's okay. But then again, that only works in a healthy Scrum or in a healthy SDLC.
Yeah.
Third anti-pattern. I love this one, and this one's near and dear to my heart, right? Only focusing on debt when it compiles. Oh my goodness. I have talked to clients for almost 5 years about not doing this. And I have just, for whatever reason, I cannot win this fight. I cannot get teams to see that when you allow your engineering crews to improve the system while you're developing it and avoiding general tidying and dealing with software rot and avoiding the whole hardening sprints thing, which is just, I really dislike that concept. You're going to get so much better quality out of your teams if you let them pay their debt down over a long period of time instead of waiting till the end and paying in one giant payment. What do you think about this, Colleen? You and I have had a lot of conversations about this.
Yeah, this comes back to how we plan our work. And so I think for a lot of this, it's like, how do you allocate capacity to always have space for this? And the answer is by not thinking about allocation as an individual activity. I see a lot of, I remember going into one organization where one of the leaders kept a spreadsheet with every developer's name in the whole dev org of what they were working on and the date they would roll off. And they were using Scrum on top of that. And so it's interesting because it's like, as soon as we start thinking about allocation and how much time to give for XYZ thing, we're breaking down our ability to have any slack in our system to respond to stuff like that. And it's not just tech debt, right? It's urgent requests, it's production fixes, it's a million different things. And we have to take a step back sometimes. And I think WIP limits can help with this, obviously, but it's also about looking at how we deliver in a different way so that we're not thinking of our dev teams as this resource where we have to figure out how everybody's at 100% utilization or we're wasting money, that we're looking at it as how do we have enough capacity in this team for them to work on features, work on tech debt, think, research, explore solutions, right? And that's the thing I see a lot of teams get stuck in, is where there's leadership that's forcing that conversation about making sure that everybody's staying busy instead of thinking about how we have space in our system and space in our workflows so that we can absorb things like tech debt anytime, production issues anytime, right? It's not going to cripple us when that stuff comes up.
I want to mention something. I want to hit on a psychology thing that you just talked about, where you have the business leaders setting up in their office, in their corner office, and they're literally obsessing over every dollar spent on what their engineering team is doing. I think if you're there, you've lost, because the trust that you have in your teams is now broken. It's completely gone. Now, am I saying that you shouldn't make sure you're getting your value out of your team? No, not at all. I am certainly saying you should hold your crews to a standard and to a level of production that makes sense. But a lot of business leaders are not comfortable with this concept of slack, which is another pushback I get when I talk about Kanban, because they think that that is a waste of money or a waste of time. And you go back to what Google did. Like Google back in the day was like, yeah, we give our engineers every Friday off or something like that to play and do whatever they want. And I believe that actually hurt us more than it helped us, because it made business leaders see developers as just slack asses that want to sit around and play with their toys on every Friday. But that's not true. We really do want to build a good thing and get it into production with as little friction as possible. But you have to trust us in order for us to be able to do that.
Well, and I think Slack is an underrated element for a lot of industries, right? For a lot of jobs. It's like
Yes.
when you get the time to think or sit, when your phone's dead and you're stuck somewhere and you can't mindlessly thumb through news streams or TikToks. That's when we get a chance to really think about what we're doing and what we're working on and without having that in any creative space like development work, I mean, you're never going to be doing your best work. And,
Right.
I've been in, one of the teams I worked with recently was a security org. I didn't know this going in, but they were telling me that the security teams in most organizations have the highest level of turnover in the whole business because it's constant burnout, it's constant firefighting, everything's an emergency, there's no end in sight, and there's no slack time. So in addition to all these fires that you're fighting, there's also projects that you would like to maybe do so that it's not constant firefighting, but there's never any time for that.
Right.
And I think what's really interesting when you think about what that does to your psyche, right, is it's burning you out. You never feel productive. You never feel like the work you're doing is valuable, right? It's just trying to band-aid everything. So of course you quit. I wouldn't want to be in that spot either. And so we have to start thinking about how do we create space for creative work? How do we create a system that's stable, right? Because I think the downside of things like sprints, where sprints in a lot of ways end up being like a mini waterfall where, we start slow and then we panic at the end of 2 weeks and jam everything in to try to be able to have a successful demo and a release, and people are burned out, and then we start over and we start slow because everybody's tired from the last sprint. So it's like, if we really want to build an ecosystem for our teams where work is truly stable, we have to think about what's a pace that is sustainable for everybody, that's not going to burn them out, where we have space to think creatively, we can deliver value, we can get people engaged, and we're not burning everybody out in these 2-week up and down cycles.
I like to call it the bathtub curve of doom because it kind of looks like a bathtub, right? It's like we start off and we come off the sprint commit and we go down and we're like, whew, I can relax for a little bit because we're burnt out from the previous sprint and we're kind of operating at maybe 30% capacity. And then at the end of week 1, we're still chilling. And then maybe second day of week 2, we go, oh shit, I have a lot of work to do. And then we have to ramp back up to 120%. And then you just have kind of this sawtooth curve that is completely unsustainable, right?
Yeah.
So when I talk to my teams, I tell them avoid this at all costs. Like, let's try and just like work hard up front, right? Let's put in like 70% effort up front. But that slack that you're mentioning is something that none of my teams, unfortunately, get the luxury of working with, and a lot of our customers. And that's not to insult my customers, but I feel like that's something that we need to focus on in the community, because let's talk about how you get better as a software engineer. When I'm working on a team and I'm hanging out and doing work on a sprint, if all I'm ever doing is sprinting, if all I'm doing is rushing to get to the end, at what point do I learn how to run properly? Like, if there's any runners that are listening to this, there is actually a thing about cadence, and there's a thing about making sure that you're orienting your body correctly if you're doing like a marathon or a long-term run. Yes, you can run that however you want, but you are going to be completely jacked at the end of it, right? So at what point do we allow our engineers to learn how to run correctly, which requires slack in the system for our more senior folks or their peers to develop through things like mobbing or pairing and test-driven development, red-green refactor loops, things like that, allows them to understand how to move forward in a healthy way, because we're almost forcing our developers to learn the unhealthy habits of the sprint, like the literal running down the road sprint, and we're not giving them time to learn how to build software correctly. And this anti-pattern, I think, really kind of brings that home.
Yep, absolutely. And I know not all teams have separate QA functions. Sometimes developers own the QA side of that responsibility too. But in organizations where you do have a QA, dedicated QA role on these teams, they're dealing with the same thing, right? They have nothing to do. And then they spend 2 days of every 2 weeks working 16-hour days because they're trying to get the sprint over the finish line. And I think it's just it's very broken. I remember I have a very fond memory of a development manager who came to me and said, stop talking about how long stories are taking on the board because you're making everyone on the team feel bad. And I was like, I'm confused.
Yeah.
So we switched to talking, we switched from sprint commitments, right? Because we were looking at how are we we were always looking at that 2-week time box of how are we pushing against that time box. And I can see where it's the same thing we talked about with the security teams. Like, it's stressful, and it's not really respecting the work at all at that point. We're just pushing against this artificial time box that we've created for ourselves. And I think you see that take a toll on the people, but also on the quality, right, of what we're doing, like you said. And we're pushing, we're pushing people to the bathtub curve, as you mentioned, to try to get things done when it doesn't totally make sense for the work that we're doing.
Right. And that specific weaponization of metrics, not that I think you were doing that in that case. A lot of people don't mean to do this. And developers, we can be a little bit, a little bit emotional sometimes. You can come to me and say, why is this taking 5 days? And I'm going to genuinely feel bad, because I'm like, I really don't want it to take 5 days. I'm trying really hard here. I've been blocked. There are things I don't like, and I kind of, spew 15 reasons as to why it's not where it wants to be. That's not me making excuses. That's me legitimately feeling bad about it and saying, I really wish that I had this further along, but I don't, for reasons X through Y through Z, right? I think, we have to be careful about how we talk about metrics with developers. Developers need to get a little bit, we've been beaten with them for so long that, we have we're broken goods. We have a lot of baggage when you start talking about metrics, and we need to fix that in ourselves and in our own community and be a little bit less, again, sensitive to certain metrics when they're well-intentioned and well-meaning. But you also have to develop metrics that make sense. Like you mentioned earlier, let the team pick the metric, because when they pick it, they're bought into it and they can focus on it and they won't feel bad, or at least they'll know when they're underperforming to that metric. And that's it's better for me to know I'm underperforming than for you to come to me and tell me I'm underperforming.
Absolutely. And I think that, we talked a little bit at the beginning about autonomy for the teams, right? About how do you get teams excited about what they're building, get them involved in solving the problem, get them involved in picking the process too, right? For that matter. I think metrics are a great way to understand what's important to a team and what they want to be working towards. But so is asking them, like, is Scrum working the way you want it to? What would you change? Is Kanban something you're interested in? You don't have to pick one or the other. You can use flow metrics in Scrum, and you can use continuous flow and not have to end everything you've started and do sprint planning at the beginning, right? There's ways to blend these practices together. And I think the best thing you can do for a team is let them pick how they want to work.
Exactly. Right? That's what I love about the Agile Manifesto. It does not prescribe Scrum. We miss that, right? We think it's only Scrum, and it only has to be, it can be anything. I mean, the thing I love most about Kanban, then we'll go to our final anti-pattern, is that it's a process you can apply to anything, right? It came out of Toyota production management. It is applied to how cars are built. They perfected it over in Japan. It's called Kanban, which means card. Is it red card? What does it mean?
I think it's got two meanings. One is a card, like the card is written on, and the other one is a signal of capacity, like a signal that there's space.
There you go. My 4 years of Japanese at Tech have failed me. I completely have forgotten. But in any event, it's a great process to apply to many different things, right? And that's why I love what you're doing at your current company and trying to promote the way to other scenarios. I've seen it used in hospitals. I've seen it used all over the place, which is why I tell my engineering teams that Kanban isn't just something that you can apply to SDLCs, and you get to pick and choose how you want that process to go. Whereas Scrum and SAFe are very prescriptive and only do it this way or you're doing it wrong. And I think that's not correct. So fourth anti-pattern, you mentioned this, retrospectives, right? A lot of people think that retrospectives are just fluff and they drop them. And developers are sometimes, we're guilty of this because we don't want another meeting, right? And that's kind of the thing that you hear from engineers is, I'm sick and tired of meetings. And we do need to reduce the meeting fatigue. But I like to get my teams to the point where they're excited about a retrospective because they can come in and actually talk about things they care about. And it's an open air conversation of, I hated this, let's fix it. So retros are important, right? They feed information back into that feedback loop, not just opinions and hearsay, but they have to be data driven. You have a lot of opinions on this with Scatterspoke, your product. Talk to me about retrospectives.
Yeah. Well, I think retros do get dropped all the time. And it's funny, even inside of our team at Scatterspoke, they'll be like, we have a big deadline or a big release we're pushing to. Can we skip the retro? And I get it that it can feel like fluff, but I think that's why they get canceled, is because if it's fluffy and it feels like it's a venting session, or all we're going to do is talk about what didn't work this sprint, there's not a lot of value in that. And it does take up time. And so I think that you mentioned data, but I think what's so important is if we're tracking specific metrics, what are we doing with that data, and how does that anchor back to goals we have as a team or as an organization? And looking at, connecting all those dots. We do it on the product side, right? We start a new product with like, what is the outcome we're trying to achieve, and how are we going to take small bites to get there? We should be doing the same thing as a team about how we want to work together and how we want to improve. And I think that anchors your retros in a very different way, so that you're able to say, hey, as a team, we're working on deploying more frequently. And then in your retros, you can say, what did we do over the last 2 weeks or the last month to help us with our deployment frequency? Did it get better or did it get worse? And what steps are we going to take next to try to improve that? Without having some goals and anchoring that in data, I feel like I wouldn't want to go either. Right?
Exactly.
Especially when we were in the office, I feel like 90% of the retros I would facilitate in person were all about what snacks were in the office and then where we should go for happy hour after the retro. It was like, yeah, this is a waste of everyone's time right now. So it's like, if we want them to be valuable, I think we have to think about doing them differently. And I've seen a lot of content recently on the, what's worked well, what didn't go well, what needs improvement. And now there's hundreds of thousands of variations of all the retro formats you could possibly do. But guess what? They're all the same thing, just with different prompt questions. And I don't know that that's going to help you get to a better retro. I mean, it might be fun conversation and a different way to spin talking about those things. But until we really get to the root of what are we trying to get better at, what actions are we taking to get there, and is it working, right? Tell me it's working or it's not working and what we're going to change. And I feel like those are simple questions that we're not asking in there. And I think that's where we should start.
I think we're overfitting the retro yet again, right? We're taking it as a blunt force object that can force my teams to talk about issues that they maybe don't even want to talk about.
Absolutely.
Or the culture of the company kind of makes it hard to talk about, right? If I feel like I'm burned out, I'm not going to say that in a retro. If everybody around me is working 16-hour days, I'm going to look like a slacker. So I'm not going to say that, right? So the psychology of humans, like retros are like, and the reason we do the fun things is we try and sort of deconstruct the psychology of humans and deconstruct the psychology of feedback and figure out a way to get people to talk to us. But really, that's not what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be feeding information back into our machine to make the machine better, right? That's the whole point of Kaizen. That's the whole point of the retrospective. It's important to talk about specific issues that are important to the engineers. I'm not saying that at all, but what I'm saying is what you said about data is the most important thing to me in a retrospective, because we're holding ourselves accountable. We're saying at the beginning of our iteration, I want to get better at CI or CD or whatever. And then at the end of the iteration, if nobody holds us accountable to that goal, what was the usefulness of the goal? Why did we even talk about it? It was a waste of our time. And retros are the way, in my opinion, to enforce that accountability on top of getting information to feed up the chain. But the funny thing is, the information that's fed up the chain is almost universally ignored in most organizations I work in. Sorry if I insult anybody watching this video, but I really, having done this for many years and consulted across many different companies, and I hope I challenge you with this statement, most of the feedback that's fed up the chain from retrospectives is universally ignored. We smile and nod and say, okay, that's a great idea, I feel it. But then we don't actually come back through, hold ourselves accountable towards implementing actual things that make sense. Because usually what engineers are saying is we want more autonomy. And more autonomy scares us because we can't control autonomy, right? We can only control metrics. We can only control specific processes. And this is why we put processes in place. It's because we want to have that gotcha moment of you didn't follow the process. You need to go back and follow the process. And I know this isn't true for everyone. There are a lot of very benevolent process wielders out there. And I don't want to insult you all because I agree that there has to be process in place. But we can't just focus on the fluffiness of our retros. There has to be meat to it. And nobody's talking about that. So I appreciate that you're talking about it.
Yeah, and I think what you said is great. If an organization is open to giving teams the autonomy to pick how they want to work, what process they want to follow, what metrics they want to use to hold themselves accountable, and setting their own improvement goals to inspect and adapt upon, I think it's okay to frame the box. And I think that's what's often missing, is that we treat process as a binary solution, right? Where it's a very rigid process or it must be fucking chaos. And that's not the case. And all you have to do is think in the middle of what's the box you have to play within. Well, maybe we're going to say we're going to do deployments every Thursday afternoon. Here's what has to be true for you to participate in that. If you want to do sprints, please have them end on Thursdays. If you want to do Kanban, please make sure you're ready for deployments every Thursday, right? We're going to do a demo once a month as a company. We don't care how you get there, but here's the date for the demo, right? So you can provide, I think, some loose structure around what you want, how to frame the box and let the teams pick how they get there. But that's often, we act like if we don't do all this really rigid Scrum process or safe process, that it'll be anarchy. And it's like, you have a bunch of smart people in your organization, frame the box, give them enough autonomy to know where they can play inside that box. And I think you'll see some really amazing things happen with your teams.
You will. I think you'll also see your star performers outshine. Like they will be a blazing sun, because those are the people that want the autonomy because they can handle it. Yeah. And a lot of your folks that aren't necessarily there yet will see what others are doing. And if they truly are a fit for your culture, they're going to be like, holy cow, I want to be like that. I'm going to hang out with that person. I'm going to watch what that individual does. I'm going to look at that team and I'm going to say that team is just crushing it. I want to crush it too. Because, I want more, I want to get level up in the org or, whatever, more money, more whatever, right? That people are afraid that allowing that autonomy to come into your organization is going to cause everybody to be a slack ass and sit around and watch Netflix all day. That is a poor attitude. You've already lost. You already think that your company is full of inept idiots that can't do anything. Why are you running a company? Fire them all and offshore it, right? Why are we even doing that? So that's the difficult part from a leadership. And I've been there. Like, I have a crew of 50 people. And there are days when I have been like, are they actually doing what I want them to do? And I have to sit down and say, hold on a second, don't take a power trip. Find out through the metrics that you have set and ask them to be honest with you and build a culture that empowers and encourages high performance and empowers and encourages autonomy. And we've done that, and we've grown consistently year over year, and I have a fantastic team. There's not one person on my crew right now that I have any issues with. They're all in different journeys, stages of their journeys. They're all super excited to work here, which not a lot of consulting firms can say because we're known for burning people out. And they all like working with their clients, even ones that frustrate them, because we taught our clients that autonomy is how 7-Factor operates. And that's been great for us. And I think we're one of the few consulting firms that will stand up to clients and say, no, you're doing this wrong, I promise. Let us do it our way, and we'll prove to you that our way is better. And if you don't believe it, that's cool. If you don't want to work with us, that's completely fine with me. Because I really believe that when you unleash engineers to do what they need to do and give them autonomy with that box, you have to give them the box, right? Yeah. You will get really good things. So, Colleen, any closing words? Talk to us. What's your closing statement?
Yeah, I guess my closing statement is it doesn't have to be this hard, right? Yeah. Agile is an outcome, right? I would think about this as, I hate the term agile as a mindset. It seems it seems very fuzzy, and I don't always understand what that means. But if the things we're trying to be with Agile are focused on delivering value to our customers and empowering our people to make the right decisions and build great software, then the best thing we can do is get out of their way. And I think thinking about how we deliver and how we can make sure that we're meeting our customers' needs all starts with looking at simple things, right? These don't have to be big heavyweight processes or meetings that we're putting into place with them, but make sure we're talking about the work, make sure we're not over planning, make sure that we're thinking about the flow of work moving through our system so that we're not overburdening people or burning them out. And keep coming back to what we could be doing to get better. And I think if we just keep it really simple with those basic premises in place, Agile, so many developers probably wouldn't hate Agile so much.
They wouldn't, because trust me, we don't like it. Like, we're at a point now to where everybody just, at least the folks that in the circles I run in, we don't like Agile.
Yeah.
We pretend and we smile and we do what you tell us to do because that's what we're getting paid to do. But deep down inside, most of us think it's garbage.
Yeah. And I think it has become garbage. So no offense taken.
No, great. And again, thank you so much, Colleen. Tell us about Scatterspoke and give us a couple of websites just so folks know where to find you. We'll put it in the description below so people can go and check you guys out.
Yeah, definitely. If you're interested in running better retros as a team and taking control over your process and your improvement journey, check out scatterspoke.com. Also, check out prokanban.org if you're interested in learning more about Kanban. We have classes for team level Kanban. We have metrics for predictability and scaling with portfolio Kanban. We also have a certification journey with assessments, which I'm really proud of because so much of the assessment game out there is garbage. Like we just said,
Absolutely.
there's no verification or validation of learning or consistency of terminology. And so we've really put a lot of energy into making sure that when we talk about different practices in Kanban, that we're all consistent and that we're all saying the same thing. And last but not least, if you're interested in coaching and fixing your busted Scrum or poor Agile implementation, I do coaching through Agile Velocity.
Love it. Awesome. Thanks so much, Colleen. By the way, I'm going to send a lot of my people to you to get some good Kanban training. I love that concept. And thank you so much for your time. Thanks to everybody who's watching. Hopefully, we've challenged you a little bit, maybe made you a little irritated too, but that's completely fine with me. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you guys on the next episode.
Thanks, Jeremy.